All right, so let's get started. Um, so today's lecture, I'm going to start off with a brief discussion on the mini projects and how we are going to implement those, and then we'll get on with the lecture. So, how many of you are aware of this software that's available? That's called GIS. How many of you know about GIS? When you're surveying, did you encounter this software called QGIS?
No, sir.
No. All right. Okay. So what I'm going to do today to begin with is to give a quick introduction to GIS. GIS basically stands for Geographic Information System. All right. So this Geographic Information System is a very, very powerful tool for analyzing, visualizing spatial data, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to open up, okay, I'm going to share my screen and then I'll open up the, okay. So what I'm going to ask you all to do, okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right. So 1 second, let me start sharing again. Yeah. Okay. So are you able to see my screen? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So now this software that I'm showing, are you able to see at the top the name of the software? It says QGIS. Are you able to see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what I'm going to ask all of you to do is after the lecture, you will go online, Google QGIS, download the software, and have it installed on your laptops. Okay, so this is going to be useful not just for this course. Other courses may use GIS. Eventually your BTech project may require QGIS. And then if you're going to apply for a job, and if you say that, I know how to use the, QGIS, for example, that is an added advantage for your resume as well. Okay, so GIS is becoming more and more an essential tool that is required for every engineer, especially a civil engineer. Okay, so you will go online, download this QGIS software, install it on your laptops, and some part of the project will be done inside this software. Okay, this software gives you lots of tools that you can use to do some kind of spatial analysis. All right, so I'm going to go through some of the steps here. If you're not able to catch them, do not worry. This is getting recorded. It will go online. You will have access to the video. You can go and look at the video carefully and understand which button I'm clicking and so on. I don't want to spend a lot of time on showing which button I'm clicking to do what and so on, because anyway it's going to be recorded and uploaded. So what's the point in showing it, doing it slowly? However, if you do have questions, you can just stop me and say, hey, what exactly did you do and so on. All right. So all right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import. Okay, so this button over here is to import a file. So I'm going to import Andhra Pradesh districts. Okay, I'm doing this for Andhra Pradesh. I'm going to give you data for Andhra Pradesh, but obviously if you have other states information and data, you can use that as well. But for now, for illustration, I'm going to show Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so I'm going to import this Andhra Pradesh, what is called a shape file. Okay, so open. All right, so you're able to see this this map of Andhra Pradesh, which shows the different districts, right? So there are about 13 districts in Andhra Pradesh. So you can see all of them. Our district, this district where IIT Tirupati is located, is in Chittoor district. Okay, so this is Chittoor, the southernmost district of Andhra Pradesh, Chittoor, and this is where our campus is. All right. So now, so this is the spatial extent of Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, let us assume that I have the locations of the different rainfall gauges in Andhra Pradesh. Okay, And now for illustration, I'm going to show you how to import those rainfall gauges into this environment, into QGIS environment. Right now, I have brought in what is called a polygon. So these are all polygons. Each of these different shapes that you see corresponds to a district, and they are in the GIS environment. They are called polygon shapefiles. So these are polygons. Okay, it is what is called a shape file. SHAPEFILE, shape file, and this particular shape file is a polygon. Okay, because there are it's dividing up the area into these irregularly shaped polygons. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is import the locations of a rainfall gauge, right? So now the location of a rainfall gauge will not necessarily be a polygon. It will be, what will it be? What kind of information will it be? If I show on this map the location for the city of Vijayawada, for example, or the city of Visakhapatnam or Rajahmundry or whatever other city inside Andhra Pradesh, what will that be? Will it be representing an area, or will it be what will it represent?
Point.
What is a point, right? So I'm going to import information about a particular point, which may be a city, it could be an airport, it could be, in this particular case, it refers to a rainfall station, which is recording rainfall information. Okay. So for that, let me open a text file that I've created. Not this one, this one. Okay, so this is a text file that I've created. Okay, this text file has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. Okay, column number 1 is serial number. Column number 2 is LONG, which means longitude. Okay, column number 3 is lat, which is latitude. Okay, so to define a position on the map, you require, just like on a map, on a graph, you have an XY coordinate. On the globe, to define a position, you require latitude, longitude. You're all aware of this, right? So that latitude, longitude is like X and Y. Okay, so typically we say, what is the latlon of this place? Okay, that is how people who are familiar with this, that's the terminology we use. What is the latlon? Okay, but of course, because latitude is Y and longitude is X. Okay, so therefore, although we call it latlon, in this file I'm putting it as longitude, latitude, because longitude is X coordinate and latitude is Y coordinate, conventionally. Okay, so longitude, latitude is given over here, and then there is name. Name is, I've just given some random name, Chittoor 1, Chittoor 2, Chittoor 3, and so on. You're able to see this file, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So
Yes, sir.
I have these the different names of the stations that's given in column number 3, column number 4, I'm sorry. And then the next column is rain in millimeters. Okay, so you see 750, 635, 810, 495, 650, and so on. These are all numbers corresponding to the rainfall received at those locations. Chittoor 1 corresponds to 750 millimeters of rainfall. Chittoor 9 corresponds to 840 millimeters of rainfall, and so on. Okay, so each of these locations I have so I create a file which has latitude, longitude, the name of the location, and the rainfall received at that location. I've created this as a text file. Okay, it's a simple text file. You can create it in Notepad or whatever it is. All right, and it is comma delimited. As you can see, between successive columns, I've got commas, right? 1, 79.00, whatever it is. That when you see the comma, that means the next column is starting. Okay, then you have the comma, and then I have the next latitude, for example, then comma, then the name of the location, then comma, and then the last attribute is the rainfall received at that location. So the first line of this file is giving me information about what data is contained in this file. Okay, I can have n number of columns. Okay, there's no limitation on that. If I have n number of columns, I should have the column name should all be separated by comma. The first column is serial number, comma, longitude, comma, latitude, comma, 9, comma, rain, comma. You can have temperature, velocity, whatever it is. You can have any number of columns. All you have to do is keep adding a comma at the end of every column. Okay, and then you can add as many columns as you want. So for now, for illustration, I'm just going to have these simple columns which are showing you the latitude, longitude, name, and rainfall. Okay, Now this file, I'm going to import it into my QGIS environment. Okay, I'll show you how to do that. You're still able to see my file. If at any point you're not able to see the screen, you should immediately let me know. Okay, because this is a test. Okay, so then I click on this add delimited text layer. Okay, don't worry about it. You can catch it in the video if you miss it. Okay, so then I import this file, browse. So this is the file that I created, test.txt. Okay. So now this test.txt requires an x coordinate and a y coordinate. So x coordinate corresponds to longitude, y coordinate corresponds to latitude. So I select those, and then I import this this information into the. Okay, I click OK a couple of times. So are you able to see these points? Okay, I'm going to zoom into Chittoor district. Okay, so you're able to see all these different points located. These are just, I just clicked some random points. Okay, the point, the objective is to show you how it works. You will have to do this for your own district and for your own data points. These points that I clicked, they are not real rainfall gauges. This is just something that I created by hand. Okay, you on the other hand will have the names of the locations. You will have to find out the latitude, longitude of that location and put it into a text file and import it in like this. Okay, so this is these are the locations of the different rainfall gauges. Okay, and as you can see, although I called it Chittoor 1 to 10 or something, I called them, some locations are outside Chittoor. Okay, I've just done it for convenience. You will understand why I did that. Okay, so now let us say the objective, you know the rainfall at these 10 different locations. Okay, if I tell you to find out what is the average rainfall in Chittoor district, okay, you've already learned how to do this. How do you find it out? What is the simplest way you will find it out first? What is the simplest? Arithmetic mean, right? You will just take all those 10 numbers and take the average of those. That will give you your arithmetic mean. Okay, but whether it will give you a meaningful estimate, we don't know. Okay, so you will have to pick and choose which method to use. Arithmetic mean will give you some average. It might not necessarily be the best way of doing it, but okay, so that's possible. So what you can do is compute the arithmetic mean. That's the simplest one. That doesn't require QGIS. If you just have the, all those numbers, you just add them all up, divide it by the total number of locations, and you're done. Okay, that's one. What is any other method that we can use to estimate the average rainfall?
Thousand polygon.
Thousand polygon. Excellent. Okay, so now I'm going to show you. Now, obviously, if you were to do the thousand polygon by hand, it would be very, very cumbersome, right? You'll have to create so many triangles, draw the perpendicular bisector, and then find out where they intersect and then do it. Fortunately for us, QGIS will do all the hard work for us. Okay, so now let us find out how to create the thousand polygons. Now, unfortunately, what we call thousand polygon in our class, in QGIS it is called by a different name. Okay, but what's in the name? Okay, a name, you all know this, right? A rose is a rose is a rose. Hopefully you've heard that. Anyway, so it's a different name but the same idea. Okay, so you go to vector, geometry tools, and then it says Voronoi polygons. Okay, another name for thousand polygon is Voronoi polygons. Okay, don't worry about it, it's just a name. All right, okay, so I click on Voronoi polygons, and then it asks me the input layer. The input layer is this test that I imported. Okay, you can call it whatever you want, of course. So in this case it is test, and then I'll specify where to save the output. The output will be the thousand polygons. Okay, so it's asking me output polygon shapefile. So I'm going to save that to a folder that I've created. So I'm going to call it thousand polygons.shp. SHP is the extension for shapefile. Okay, and then I click on save, and then I hit OK here. Hit OK again. Close. So now you see. Okay, let me just move this below so that you can see. Okay, so now do you agree that these are thousand polygons for these locations that are given? It looks reasonable.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, let
Yes,
me change the. Okay. Okay, so this is just to make life a little bit easier so that you can see. Okay, so now you see I have the Thyssen polygons corresponding to these different locations, and okay, so but because I did this randomly, it's not covering the entire area of Chittoor district. You're able to see this is the boundary of Chittoor district. On this side there's no problem. On this side I'm missing a little bit of an area, right? This area which is actually inside Chittoor district is not falling inside my Thyssen polygons, but that's okay, minor point. You can very easily fix that. Okay, so now I've got my Thyssen polygons. Now what do I do? Now what do I do?
Fraction of total rainfall. I mean, you can calculate.
If you remember the formula, the average P bar is basically P1 times A1 plus P2 times A2 plus P3 times A3 plus P4 times A4 and so on. Okay, divided by A1 plus A2 plus A3 plus A4, so on. Okay. Now the question is, what is A1, A2, A3?
The area surrounding PI.
Okay, fair enough. Now let us take an example here. This let us look at this polygon. Are you able to see my mouse pointer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now this polygon is entirely, this Thyssen polygon is entirely inside the Chittoor district boundary. Correct? So in this case, if you do P1 times A1, no problem. But if you are looking at, let us say this is P2. Okay. This location has a rainfall of P2 and you want to compute A2. Now is A2 the entire area of the polygon or the area that falls inside Chittoor district that is inside that polygon?
Inside Chittoor district.
Inside Chittoor district. Okay. So your task now is to find out A1, A2, A3, A4 such that that area is inside that polygon, but also inside Chittoor district. Okay. All right. So how do we do that? So there's a tool over here which says measure line. You can also measure area over here. You can click on that, measure area. Okay. You click on that, then it gives you the answer in square meters. Okay. So how you do that is once you click on that, then you come and click here, for example, let's say. And then at the last vertex, double click. So you see over here, oops, I'm sorry. Last vertex, you have to right click. You right click at the last vertex, it stops. So you see what the area says. Are you able to see this shaded region?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. So it says the area of this polygon is 2298.941 kilometers square. Okay. So you have obtained the area of this polygon. Now, if I'm interested in the area of, let us say some other, let us try to look at this polygon. What about this polygon? How would you do that? You click. So obviously I'm not claiming that the way I'm clicking is very, very accurate, but for this purpose, it's okay. Okay. I'm not saying that I'm not making a mistake when I'm clicking, because whatever accuracy I'm able to get with my mouse, that's the accuracy that I'm after. Okay. It may be off by a little bit. Yes.
Isn't there a guidance system like in AutoCAD?
What is that?
Isn't there like a guidance system like there is in AutoCAD, you know, like the edges are marked out.
Yeah,
so you can
that's,
easily point to them.
Unfortunately, this one doesn't have that, or maybe there is a way to do it, but are you interested in that level of accuracy? As long as you get it approximately okay, it's fine. Okay. And I'm not interested in getting the accurate answer in any way. Anyway, this is an estimate of the average rainfall. It is not the actual average rainfall. Okay.
Yes, sir.
If you want to do it, there is one more way of doing it, which is a little bit more cumbersome. I want to just teach you how to do it such that you get a number out of it. I'm not here to teach you precisely how to do it with all the, with all the details. If you can get it with some accuracy, that's enough. Okay. As long
Okay.
as you make an honest attempt to do it as close as possible as you can visually do it, it's fine. Okay. Okay. So let me continue. Up to here, it's all regular boundary. Then after that, I'll try to go around this. Okay. Instead of going crazy, clicking, I'm just going to very quickly go around the boundary. And then at the last vertex, I right click. Oops, I'm sorry. I think I made a mistake somewhere. Let me start again. Measure area. 1, 2. This is all very straightforward stuff, nothing fancy. Okay, I made a mistake again. I'm sorry, last attempt, but now I'm just making a mistake when I'm clicking. Okay. Okay, I'll do it quickly so that I don't waste time. Okay. Okay. So now the area of this shaded region is 1363.203 kilometers square. Okay. You click, left click all around. When you come to the last vertex, you right click. Okay. So that is the way of doing it. I think I was by mistake, I was right clicking twice. You should only right click once. Okay. That was the mistake that I was making. Anyway, but obviously you can see that I've not gone exactly around the boundary. I've gone a little bit outside to do it quickly. But if you spend a little bit more time, a few more seconds, you can do a more accurate job than this. Okay. So this gives you the area. Now you will have to do this for all the polygons, for all the rainfall stations, such that you cover the entire area of Chittoor district. Okay. Now there's one more way of quickly checking whether you've got your numbers completely, whether you're close to the actual number or not. You go on Google and search for Chittoor district area. It will say 15,500 something square kilometers. After you finish this, all the polygons, right? When you add them all up, it should come close to 15,500 square kilometers as the total area of Chittoor district, right? That's a quick way of checking whether your number is right. Of course, if you do it for East Godavari district, you will have to go online and search for East Godavari district area or Visakhapatnam district area or whatever other district. Whichever district you choose, you can simply go to Google and search the area of that district. Google is going to tell you what the total area is. And in this entire procedure, if you add it all up, it should come to the total district of the area. See, total area of the district. All right. So, all right. So if this is the procedure, is it not straightforward to compute P bar? P1 A1 plus P2 A2 plus P3 A3 plus so on divided by A1 plus A2 plus A3 plus etc. etc. Any
Yes.
questions?
So how do we download this?
You go to Google, you say QGIS download, it will give you the link. Make sure it is the QGIS original website. I think it's qgis.org. I can send the link to the class in case this is a problem. Okay, so you can all go to that website, download it. I think it's about 300 megabytes. So if you have a data issue, maybe you should do it on a day where you don't have any classes. Saturday, Sunday, you can download it, because on Saturday, Sunday, you don't have your classes, so you're not using up your data. But it's a one-time thing. You download it once and then you have it for it's 300 megabytes, I think. Okay, so I hope that's not a problem. In case it's a problem, okay, if you don't have enough data or something, you tell me. I'll see what I can do. Okay. All right. So now, so this information. So now the question is, you will ask me, but I don't know what the locations of my rainfall gauges are, and I don't know what the rainfall is. Okay. So I'm going to send you the whole class. I'm going to send an Excel file with the rainfall data for an entire year for the whole of Andhra Pradesh at about 1,200 or maybe more rainfall gauges all over the state. Okay, so at least in the district of Chittoor, I have drawn only 10 rainfall gauges, right? But in reality, Chittoor district has 120 or 130 rainfall gauges. Now, what I want you to do is, I don't want you to import all 130 in and try to compute with 130 polygons and so on. I want you to take, like 10 or 15 locations from out of those 130 that cover the entire district of Chittor. Okay, so for example, you should pick one location out of that 130 which is in the southwest corner, one location which is in the northeast corner, and so on. Right? You do that. You may even have to take one location which is outside Chittor district, for example. Okay, so that your thighs and polygons cover the entire district. Okay, you may have to take a value from the neighboring district. If you are not able to say, for example, if you are in Chittor district, the neighboring district, there's no neighboring district inside Chittor. It's outside outside Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so if you want to, you can even create a dummy point here and give it some give it the rainfall of the nearest rainfall gauge available inside Chittor district. Right? You can do something like that. My objective is not to get the correct answer at the end of this. My objective is that you learn how to use this QGIS, because it is going to be very, very useful for you no matter what you do in your future. Whether you go for a job, whether you core job, non-core job, whatever it is, GIS, having GIS, knowledge of GIS is a plus point for you. Okay, so you will learn not only hydrology through this, you will also learn how to use GIS, how to manipulate the data and so on. Okay, so that is the objective of this. Two birds with one stone. Okay, so I will send you the data for the whole state of Andhra Pradesh. You don't have to. You pick any district you want. You can pick Chittor district. You can pick the district where you are living. Whatever you want to do, it's fine. Okay, but you're going to work on this individually. You will pick a district. You take all the locations where the rainfall is available for that district, and you will pick maybe 10 or 15 rainfall stations within that district, such that it covers the entire area, and you are able to create these thighs and polygons. Okay, so even creating this thighs and polygon, you may have to do a little bit of trial and error. You create it once, and then you see if the thighs and polygon covers the entire district. If it doesn't, you do one more trial until you are able to do a complete thighs and polygon that covers the entire district. See, I did a test now, but even in my test case, my thighs and polygon is not covering the entire district, but it's okay. In this particular case, no matter what, even this area which is outside the thighs and polygon will have, this will be the closest gauge. So therefore you can include that in the area for corresponding to that precipitation. Okay, is that all right?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, remember, you're all going to do this individually, but I'm not against any of you discussing how to do this. You can discuss among yourselves how to do this, but your work, you have to do it yourself. Okay. And at the end of this, what I want to see is, number one, the rainfall, just like you see on this plot right now. You will create a PowerPoint which will have at the most 4 or 5 slides. Okay. One slide will show all the locations of your rainfall gauges and the thighs and polygons created, just like this. If you take a screenshot of this and put it on your slide, that is your slide number 1, for example. Okay, which will show the locations of your rainfall gauges and the thighs and polygons that you have created. Okay, then you will have a table showing A1, A2, A3, all the areas of your thighs and polygons. You will sum them all up and show the total area of your district, whatever district you have picked. And then you can compare your total area with the Google total area of the district. Okay, and show that, see, I created my thighs and polygons and I'm getting 15,500, whereas Google says it is 15,600. So I'm pretty close. It's okay. Okay, don't worry if it is not, if it is within a few hundred square kilometers, I'm fine with it. You don't have to get it down to the last decimal place. Okay, so you'll do that, and then you will show one more table which will show P1, P2, P3, and then A1, A2, A3 will be the next column, and then you will have the next column will be the A1 fraction, A2 fraction, and so on, and then you will show the P bar computation. Okay, so at the most 3 or 4 slides. Okay. So that is what I'm expecting from all of you, and I think this should not take you more than maybe 10 days. So I'll give you the whole of next week. You can work on this. The week after that, the Monday of the week after next week, which is, let's see what date it is. That will be September 14th. September 14th, you will present in the class. Each of you will present for 2 minutes. That's it. We have only 50 minutes in the class. You have to be very quick. Just show 3-4 slides. These are the locations that I picked. These are the Thyssen polygons that I created. These are the areas. This is the area comparison. See, I've come within 10% of the total area. This is the final number that I obtained. Okay. And each of you will pick whichever district you want. Okay. So there's 24 people in the class. There's 13 districts. No, obviously there will be some repetition, but that's okay. And if 2 people get more or less the same answer for the same district, that's good news, which means both of you are, one of each of you is independently verifying each other, right? So, all right, any questions? I'll send the data by this evening. You can, download this information and have it ready for yourself. All right. Okay. So, see the data itself, you might have to do a little bit of cleaning up to, I'll share the data with you. You can figure out what to do with it. It should be fairly straightforward. All right. Any questions? Okay. So let's, we will, okay. I'm going to stop now with this. I'll get on to my lecture. So today, you're still able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today we are going to talk very quickly about evaporation and evapotranspiration. Okay. So it's 10:30. So we have 20 minutes. Let's try to finish evaporation and evapotranspiration today. Okay. So evaporation. You all understand what evaporation is. There's not much to be. I'm not going to define evaporation for you. It's basically water that leaves a water body from the liquid state to the gaseous state. Okay. So let's quickly get into what are the factors that affect evaporation. Can anybody tell me any of the factors that will affect evaporation?
Surface area.
Surface area. Okay. Interestingly, I've not listed it. Temperature. Okay. Very good then.
Weather conditions.
Temperature has already been mentioned. Can you be a little
more or
specific? What is that?
So like
Humidity.
if there is precipitation or sometimes if it's sunny.
Okay, all right. Temperature has already been said in different ways. Okay, humidity you're saying. Okay, fine. Anything else?
Concentration.
What is that?
Concentration of salts.
Very interesting. What happens when concentration of when I dissolve something in water? What happens to the evaporation? Does it increase, decrease?
Decrease.
Decrease.
Okay. Did both of you say decrease or?
I said decrease.
What was the other one? I didn't hear it. Who was that? Sindhuja?
Decrease, sir.
You said decrease.
Anjana, sir.
Anjana. Okay. You said decrease. All right. Why does it decrease?
Specific gravity increases.
Specific gravity increases. Oh, very interesting. Good. Yeah. So when you dissolve a solid in a liquid, it increases the specific gravity. And she says when specific gravity increases, evaporation decreases. Good. Okay. So let's just quickly go through the fact. I think one point that people have missed is, okay, so vapor pressure, we've discussed this, temperature, wind, you guys missed this. Okay. So imagine this, suppose I have two identical locations with the same temperature, same sunlight, everything is the same, but one location it's windy, the other place it's still. Okay. The place where it is more windy will have more evaporation, because when the wind comes, it takes away whatever moisture has escaped. Okay. So that the humidity or the at the location decreases, so that more evaporation can happen, right? So that's how wind impacts this. Atmospheric pressure also impacts this. So do you think at the same temperature, I'm at mean sea level and I'm at 100 meters above mean sea level, where will evaporation be more? Same temperature, everything else is same. Only elevation is different.
Higher elevation would result in higher evaporation.
Why is that?
So because it receives more intense sunlight.
It receives what? More
More intense sunlight.
more intense sunlight. See, the sun is 1,000,000 kilometers away. Okay, 100 meters, 200 meters. I don't know if it makes a huge difference, right?
Low pressure, sir.
Okay, lower pressure causes more evaporation. Why?
Because evaporation depends on the pressure. Particles want to get out, but because of pressure from upper particles, it affects. It's all
Yeah.
force.
So that's where vapor pressure comes in, right? You remember we spoke about this in the last semester, that if you're climbing towards Mount Everest, the boiling point changes. So people in those days, when they were climbing Mount Everest, they would take some water, boil it, and then check the temperature at which the boiling happened. Okay, and they knew that if the boiling happens at 75 degrees Celsius, that means they have climbed 7,000 meters or whatever it is. At mean sea level, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. When you go up in the atmosphere, boiling happens at a lower temperature. So if boiling happens at a lower temperature, then evaporation must also be happening at a faster rate, right? As you go up in the altitude. Okay. All right. And then soluble salts. I think somebody mentioned this. Okay, good. So these are some of the factors that affect evaporation. In terms of measuring evaporation, there are multiple ways of doing it. We'll talk about 3 basic methods. The first one is using what is called an evaporimeter, or what is called an evaporation pan. Okay, so there are different types of pans which estimate evaporation. There's what is called the Class A pan, which is popularly used in the US. In India, we have the BIS standard pan. There's also another pan called the Colorado sunken pan, which is also popularly used in the US. So these are all used. Now these pans, basically you'll have a pan, you'll pour some water in it, and you will measure how the water level in the pan changes as a function of time. I mean, when I say function of time, you're not measuring it in seconds, you're measuring it in hours and days, right? So you pour the water today, and then you check, if you check 24 hours later, you check how much water has decreased. Okay, assuming that if there was no precipitation overnight in between, then whatever water has been lost must have been lost due to evaporation, right? So that is what is called the pan evaporation. From the pan, whatever water evaporates, that is called the pan evaporation. It's one way of very quickly measuring what the evaporation rates are. Okay, and usually these pans come with what is called a pan coefficient, okay, which is typically referred to as CP. So the evaporation from a lake will usually be this pan coefficient multiplied by the pan evaporation. Okay, pan evaporation is what the number that you get from the pan, and then you multiply it by a coefficient, you get the actual evaporation from a nearby lake. Okay, so you can have like these evaporation stations at multiple locations all over the place, all over your watershed, for example, and at each location it will tell you how much is the evaporation happening at that particular location. Okay, and typically we look at evaporation not in terms of for the entire month. You'll say the monthly mean evaporation rate is so and so millimeters per day. That is what is typically done. Okay, so this is one direct way of estimating evaporation. You just go out there, you place some kind of a pan, you measure the loss of water in the pan, and then you are able to infer how much water has been lost. Okay, so that is the direct way of measuring. Other ways are using what are called empirical equations. Okay, so now there are 2 very popular equations. One is called the Myers formula. EL is the evaporation loss, and then you have this some kind of an empirical equation. Similarly, you have the Rower's formula, which is also this extremely long empirical equation. Do not worry about this. You're not expected to memorize all these things, but this is just for your information. I think, so you're now able to see the entire equation, right? So you have this massive equations, which are, I'll just explain what these different terms are. EL is basically the evaporation rate, usually expressed in millimeters per day. EW and EA are the saturation vapor pressure and the actual vapor pressure in the air, which is usually measured in millimeters of mercury. U9, this U suffix 9 or U subscript 9 and U subscript 0 are the wind velocities at 9 meters above ground level and at ground level respectively, and so on. PA is the barometric reading, the atmospheric pressure, and then Km is what is called the Myers coefficient, which is 0.36 for deep waters and 0.5 for shallow waters, and so on. Right? Do not worry about these equations. You don't have to memorize them. This is just for your information. Okay. Evaporation, typically you use these kinds of empirical equations. The previous method that I mentioned was having a pan directly at different locations and measuring the actual loss of water from the pan. That tells you the estimate of evaporation. This is an empirical equation where you measure other parameters and try to estimate how much evaporation must have happened using this kind of an empirical equation. Okay, it has some analytical basis. It does have, because it is looking at the saturation vapor pressure and the actual vapor pressure and so on. So it is able to estimate what the vapor pressure is. Sorry, what the evaporation rate is, using a combination of some kind of theoretical basis plus some empirical, observed, fit. You might have fit some line through this and come up with this equation. All right. Then the last method is what is called an analytical method. Okay, where you go in. So this is completely theoretical. You come up with an explanation for how to estimate the evaporation rates. Among this, the most popular is the water budget method, where you equate all the inflows and outflows. So if I take a lake, for example, and I take a sufficiently long duration of time, I measure all the inflows into the lake. It could be precipitation, it could be runoff, it could be groundwater inflow, right? Those are all the inflows. And then you measure all the outflows. There may be evaporation, of course, is one, the most obvious one. You may also have some streams that drain the lake. You may also have groundwater exiting from the lake into the aquifer. If you're able to estimate all those, then if you write the equation for the water budget for that entire lake, the one term that is left is the evaporation. So you're able to estimate what the evaporation loss is if you are able to estimate all the others. Now, whether you are able to estimate all the other terms or not is also a question, right? Estimating precipitation, relatively easy, right? Estimating runoff, relatively easy. But groundwater inflow or outflow from the lake is relatively difficult to measure. Okay, so in this case, again, there's uncertainty, right? You may not be able to accurately estimate how much groundwater is flowing in or how much groundwater is flowing out. So in that time, so when these two terms are unknown, then you're left with like 3 unknowns and only 1 equation. So it becomes a little bit difficult. So that's one of the challenges of using this kind of an approach. The other approach is to use what is called an energy balance approach, right? So you're looking at a surface water body, for example. You apply the law of conservation of energy. You look at the incoming energy. In terms of incoming energy for the lake, it is the incident sun radiation that comes and falls on the lake. That is the incoming energy. Now, this incoming energy has to be equal to all the sources of energy that the lake, all the sources or all the sinks to the energy, all the processes that take water away from the lake. Okay? It could be light that gets reflected from the lake. That is incoming energy. Reflected radiation is outgoing energy in a sense. You may have heat lost to the air. You may have heat stored by the water body. You may have the heat used up in the evaporation, or you may have heat being transferred from the lake to the ground, and so on. If you're able to again come up with an equation that defines all these things, all these different terms, then you're able to back calculate what the evaporation must have been. Again, lots of uncertainties. You may not be able to accurately estimate every single term in this. That is why the earlier methods that I spoke about, like the pan evaporation or the water budget, or even those empirical equations, the reason they are so popular is because these theory-based approaches are very, very difficult to do in practice. Okay, they are used in limited circumstances where you want really accurate information, or you're interested in getting a very good understanding of evaporation. You can use these analytical methods or these theoretical methods, but relatively they are very, very difficult to implement. Right? It's much more easy to use either an empirical equation, or you can directly use a pan to estimate the evaporation. All right. Now, sometimes we are also interested in reducing evaporation. Okay. Why are we interested in reducing evaporation from a surface water body?
To store water.
Yeah, in order to maximize the storage of water, right? So what kind of methods can you think of to reduce evaporation? Anybody? Simplest method.
How do you know
Salt,
what?
increase salt content.
One by one. Increase salt content. All right. Anybody else? Somebody. Who was that?
If it's a smaller water body, we could cover it.
Okay. If it's a smaller water body, we could cover it. Very good. In the very beginning, I think somebody, when I asked about the factors affecting evaporation, somebody said surface area. Right? Let us say I want to store a certain volume of water. If I store it such a way that instead of having a large surface area, I store it in a deep water body, but with a small surface area. That could be one easy way of limiting evaporation, right? Reducing the surface area that is exposed to the atmosphere, right? Which means it would be more beneficial to have a deep reservoir than a wide one, a shallow wide one. Okay, now this is not very easy to do, right? Because if you want to have a deep reservoir, you have to excavate. It's more expensive. It has to be stable and so on. Whereas a wide, shallow one is relatively more stable, right? The side, the walls of the reservoir, if it's shallow and wide, you can have a nice gentle slope and it will be relatively stable. But if you want a deep reservoir, it's relatively difficult. So that there are some challenges in doing that. Other ways is to have some kind of a mechanical cover, right? Somebody said, if it's a small reservoir, you just have some cover, some kind of a permanent roof or a temporary roof, which covers the surface of the reservoir. That can also be useful to limit or reduce the evaporation that happens. Now, obviously, I think whoever said that, you also said that it's not practical for large water bodies. If it's a relatively small one, you can very easily do this kind of an approach of a mechanical cover to reduce evaporation. Then the third one is to have what is called a chemical film on top of the surface of the on the entire surface, right? Increasing the salt content is a little bit difficult, right? You'll have to, how do you pour salts into a reservoir and then mix it up? And then what about using that water? You want to use it for drinking or irrigation or whatever. If you mix a lot of salt into it, it may reduce evaporation for sure. But how do you use it again? You'll have to again remove the salts and then use it. So it's very expensive, right? You can't do that. So something that is suggested has been used, in fact, in the in California especially, is using some kind of a chemical, what is called, I think it's cetyl alcohol or some kind of alcohol. I don't remember the exact name. This alcohol is spread over the surface of the water, and since alcohol is typically lighter than water, it floats on the surface and creates some kind of a film on the top of the water, and which such that it's not exposed to the atmosphere, and therefore it's able to limit the escape of water molecules from the surface of the reservoir. Okay, but of course there are some questions about whether this has some environmental impacts and so on. So this method also has its drawbacks. So reducing evaporation is desirable, I mean, from a human perspective, but it may not always be possible. Okay, all right. So that's as far as we're going to talk about evaporation. Then we're going to talk about transpiration. Okay, so now the transpiration is basically the water that leaves the plant during photosynthesis. Whenever you have photosynthesis happening, water leaves through the surface of the leaves and so on. So that is what is called transpiration. Okay, now as far as the factors affecting transpiration are concerned, it's more or less the same as whatever we discussed for evaporation. It's depending on the vapor pressure, temperature, this and that, all of those things. They are all more or less, they are similar to evaporation. In terms of the difference between evaporation and transpiration, there is one significant difference, is that transpiration only happens during daylight hours. Why is that? Anybody knows? Why does transpiration only happen during daylight hours?
Sunlight is available only.
Thank you, Chakrata. I couldn't hear you, but somebody else was saying something.
Photosynthesis occurs during
Photosynthesis
daylight.
happens only during the daytime, right? Because it requires sunlight to happen. Okay, so transpiration happens only during daylight hours. So typically it lasts for maybe, depending on which part of the world you are in, it can last between 8 hours to 12 to 14 hours and so on. Okay. Now, a very popularly used term is what is called evapotranspiration, which is a combination of evaporation and transpiration, right? So if I have a plant, that is standing on the ground, not only is water being lost through the leaves of the plant, but usually that the soil on which the plant is standing, that will also have some water on it, right? Or it may have some moisture there, which will also get lost through evaporation, right? So the combined effect of this evaporation that's happening from the land surface or from the water body on which the plant is standing, when you combine it with transpiration, that process is what is called evapotranspiration. Okay, so typically when we refer to evapotranspiration, that is referring to the loss of water that is happening from vegetation, right? It could be plants, it could be crops, it could be forest, whatever it may be, but it includes both these processes: evaporation from the soil or from the water body in which the plant is standing, and the evaporation through the transpiration through the leaves. Both of these combined together, sometimes it's referred to as, or most times it's referred to as, evapotranspiration. Okay, all right. So now within evapotranspiration, there's two concepts. One is called potential evapotranspiration, the other is called actual evapotranspiration. Okay, so if the soil moisture that's present in the soil is sufficient to completely meet the demands of the vegetation, right? So if I have a plant that requires a certain amount of water, and if the soil moisture is sufficient to completely provide that amount of water to the plant, then you have what is called potential evapotranspiration, or PET, right? So this is the maximum evapotranspiration that can happen for this particular plant. Okay, if on the other hand, if the soil moisture is limited, if it is not completely available to satisfy the needs of the vegetation, then what happens is actual evapotranspiration, or AET, right? So this AET can never be greater than PET. At the most, it can be exactly equal to PET, right? So depending on the soil moisture, you may get evapotranspiration that is at most it can be equal to potential evapotranspiration, but usually it is something less than PET, and it is what is called AET. Okay. Okay. Now there's two other concepts. I don't want to introduce that now since we are already, it's 10:52. These concepts we'll discuss next lecture, and then we'll move on from there. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. See you guys on Monday. And if you have any questions with respect to the project and so on, feel free to email me. If you have any questions about QGIS, I'll email the data to all of you, and also the link to download QGIS. All right. Thank you very much. See you on Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Right, sir.